thought I have something in front of my window so I can't see what you can see, which I'm still having some problems with, honestly. Hello, everybody. I see we've got a few people on, Inara and Ballinder the Red. I've got my chat window back on the less easy to see side because I might actually have to see my screen today. We'll see how this works out. So I'm still having neck, back problems, and I was concerned about sitting and painting even for 2 hours. So I was trying to come up with something else to do, and I thought about doing critiques and using photos and showing some stuff in person. My husband and I thought we had cracked the showing photos through OBS problem since I switched from the laptop where I had to, mail things and shift things and do all this stuff. Everything's on the same computer. We thought that would work, but OBS really doesn't want to show photos the way I want them to show photos, like in some kind of order, alphabetical, numerical. Pick one so that I can know what I'm picking. I don't know what the problem is. It seems like what I want to do must be a very basic thing that people do on streams all the time. So I do not understand why the program made for streaming does not make this way easier than it does. So we can look at photos. I may have to skip around a bit to find both sides of a figure. And we can also try the live thing, but I thought I had figured out all the color correction and the contrast and stuff, so things didn't look like washed out and blaring, and the color was somewhat like reality. And when I was setting up, it did not seem like that to me at all. So I'm not super confident about doing it that way, since the point of a critique is that you actually can see the figure to understand what I'm talking about. But we'll see. I will try something. I'll probably end up doing something like this next week. Maybe I'll do color mixing. If you have an idea for things I can do where I don't have to lean over and stick my neck out, please let me know in the chat or PM me later. The week after that, I may not be here. So like the 18th or the 19th, I don't know, whatever the Tuesday of that week is, we're going on a vacation and I have to drive. So that's one reason I'm really babying my neck, is because I want to be able to do this thing that we signed, committed money to before I started having all these problems. And I come back Sunday. My guess is that I'm going to be too tired to do anything like the 22nd or 23rd, whatever the Monday is. But we'll see. Maybe I'm not going to a convention like we would think of convention. This is like a board game only thing where you sit around and play board games all day long. And then you go out for dinner and lunch and stuff like that. So, but I'll be driving back on Sunday. So I don't know how I'll feel. I don't know how my back will feel. I finally made a doctor's appointment. I thought I had it all figured out, but I'm starting to wonder if my ability to play Dr. Google is less than I thought it was. So I'm going to go ask the real doctor if he would like to look into this any further. Monday's the 24th, and I will, as Quindy says, just let her know if I end up not feeling alive enough to do something. Board game cons aren't typically like exhausting because you're not like running around looking at this is like a smaller private convention, so there's not going to be vendors or anything like that. Sometimes you stay up late and drink too much and talk too much and stuff, but I'm old, so I don't anticipate doing too much of that. I don't see any other comments. I wonder if I can just move some of this for the time being, because we're going to try the photos. And if I could see if you have any questions or comments. And Nara says a board game con sounds fun. They are. There's like a really big one you can go to, which is in Dallas, interestingly enough. So Board Game Geek, I think they do a con twice a year now. But also, if you're coming to ReaperCon, and especially if you have friends or family who are accompanying you who aren't super into miniatures, or maybe aren't into miniatures as much as you are, and they're worried they're going to be bored. My husband comes to ReaperCon, and he's not into miniatures because he can't see very well. So he runs the board game library there. So they have a few tables where you can, you don't have to play the games. It is a library. You can take out a game and play it with your friends and family and then bring it back. You don't have to play at the tables that they have in their area. If he's available, he can try to teach you games. He doesn't necessarily know how to play like every game in the library, because what's in the library changes a little bit every year. Sometimes things come back, sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's new things. But he is also happy to try to integrate people into the games that he's playing. So there's a few people who just show up and they mostly play board games. But it is a nice thing to do. There's like a mix of different intensities. There's lighter stuff and more strategic stuff. And there's like board game adventure type things. There's a variety. So if you want to entertain your friends and family, I call him like the husband entertainment zone, because he's not the only husband that ends up there. But anyway, so that's like a mini version of a board game con, is hanging out with my husband at ReaperCon. But now let me see if I can switch. Queenie says you lost sound. Oops, and now I'm like in the wrong input. So give me just a minute on that view, and I think I should be able to fix that. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna go here because I think I can copy the thing I need to have in the other thing. Can you hear me now? I will, Quinn, you can't hear me now. All right, and now I lost my snake dudes. Okay, we'll look at this photo. So Inara's saying that they always would like to do patterns on the scales, but have troubles making it look right. And patterns definitely are trickier, because you kind of have to do all of this, but across different colors, and you're deciding where those colors go instead of the sculpt. Like the sculpt, can you see my pointer? Is a good question. I doubt that you can. I don't think I've figured out how to do that, because I'm not really sharing my screen, which I think may be the ultimate answer to solving this problem. But if you look at the belly scales, each one of those is sculpted, so that's helping us decide where the paint goes. If we start painting patterns on the smaller scales, we have to make that decision, and the edges are going to look weird, and then we have to make sure that we're picking out the scale detail in both or all of the colors if we're using more than two colors. So it definitely ups the challenge factor to add a pattern to smaller, like, you know, like a cobra, the pattern that's on the back of a cobra hood, or how some snakes have alternating, you know, diamonds of color or something like that. So the thing on the belly scales, I would call more of a texture than a pattern, because it's not, there's no difference in colors. It's just a difference in how I applied the paint. So I do not know, sadly, which episode multiple, I think it was multiple episodes, which episodes of the show. But I think if you go on my website, there is an article about these guys, and I bet it links to the videos where I painted them. Or you can just go on Reaper's YouTube, look for the Beyond the Kit playlist, and just start looking through videos. They may not be sequential because I often don't do that, but I did paint both of these on the show. So if you're interested more specifically in the techniques that I used, but basically just take my word for it, the techniques are basically the same. What's different here are the colors, and then I did what I call targeted washes. So if you look at the snake on Nagendra on the left, and let's see if we get, probably from the back, we're going to see more of the scale texture. So that scale texture is sculpted, and I started with like the rusty orange color, I think, and I do say all the colors in the video if you find it. Then I did a wash with a darker color, and then I dry brushed up with the lighter colors. So what I did with the dry brushing is fairly similar between the two of them. You can see that it goes a little more yellow on the shoulders, it goes up to the lighter color on the snake butt, on the top of the tail where it's against the ground, and then it goes darker underneath. So with the dry brushing, I was looking at the shapes, the volumes, the 3D. It's called form in art. So 2D is a shape, a circle is a shape, a sphere is a form. And what we don't think about it necessarily in painting, but we need to do some of the same things a 2D artist does to make a circle look like a sphere, because miniatures are so small that natural lighting isn't going to do it. You can set up natural lighting so it does. I don't think I included those pictures, or they didn't transfer over, because not all my pictures transferred over. But I set up a photo shoot with these guys and an unpainted one where I controlled where the light was, and I could make the same shadows that you see on the Nagendra to the right, because that's the big difference between them. They both have scale detail. If you do a wash, it brings out texture detail, so scales, rocks, the pattern on the shields. A wash is great for helping define that kind of pattern. It doesn't add the volume, the form shadows, the thing that makes it look more three-dimensional. So that's the big difference between the one on the left and the one on the right. Is I went back in with a darker wash, but I only put it in the places where I wanted to add shadows, where I wanted, if you look at a cylinder, if it's standing upright, where would it have more shadow or more light? If it's horizontal, where would have more shadow and light? So on the Nagendra, if you look at the curl of the tail, so look at just where it's lying flat on the ground, so that's like a horizontal cylinder that's curled up. So if you look in the center there of both the loops that the tail makes, it gets darker as it goes towards the ground, because if you turn a cylinder, you're looking at a cylinder horizontally, that's what happens. It goes darker as it moves away from you. Then underneath the snake butt is heavily shaded, because if we look at him from a different angle, the sculpt folds in there. It goes, it's under his body. It's not going to be receiving light from above, because the upper body is blocking that area from receiving the light. So I added those shadows in, and it looks more natural and more interesting than just accenting the scale texture. So just a wash alone is only going to accent the scale texture. If you're nervous about layering, especially with textured figures like this, you can start adding in targeted shadows with like additional layers of wash. Maybe you make it a little more opaque than a wash, but start with a wash, and you just do multiple ones. And that builds it up. And I did the same thing. If you look in between the shoulder muscles on the back, that's sculpted. So what you see on the right is sculpted. It's just those are such gentle curves that it's not going to be obvious to the viewer's eye unless we as painters add some additional shading there. So adding the highlighting on the shoulder blades helps, but then adding that little bit of extra shadow in between where the spine would be, there. You can see that it is in the sculpt. That also helps. So I don't think I guess there's more shading under the neck in this view. So you can see that. I'm not sure you can see as much there. I also did kind of the targeted thing on the metallic. This is harder to photograph, so I don't know if it's as obvious as it is to the eye. But instead of just doing an overall wash, I still have kind of like wash consistency paint, but I was thinking about where I was putting it. So if you compare the two shields here, I was putting it on the lower half, more of it on the lower half of the shield where it looks more blue on the right. On the other shield, I held that horizontal and let the wash pool where the sculpted texture dictated. So you can use washes in such a way that they kind of work with both the sculpted texture and whatever you're trying to accomplish with your light. In some ways, it may actually be easier to see on not that view. But then we'll look at that guy next. So you can see it a little bit here, I think. Back one more. On this, I'm trying to, so a little bit on this area of the shoulder pad, you can see how there's darker blue and it doesn't look shiny on the one on the right. I was using, thin down matte paint to accomplish that. And that is not a great view of it. But you can kind of see on the edges of the armor on this part of the shoulder, I was doing, it's a cylinder. It's the top of his arm. So there's just straight metallic, and I think even metallic highlights on the very top, and then some of that shading with matte paint as it moves towards his chest and as it moves towards his back. Hey, Gel Tip. Inara was reading about the Burmese python problem in Florida, and the snakes they showed had interesting pattern. Oh, are Burmese pythons run amok in Florida? But at least we get to look at their interesting patterns. The alligators aren't eating the pythons, I guess. Which I would kind of almost expect to happen. So a lot of the times when people talk about you need deeper shadows, you need more contrast, you need more highlights, it doesn't pop. A lot of the time what they're talking about is this, making the shapes, making the forms look more three-dimensional to the viewer. So the other big difference between these two, and it's not a huge difference, but I think it's a difference, is I put a little additional thought into the color scheme of the one on the right. So the scale colors are all the same for both of them, but since the dominant scale color is orange or an orangey brown, I used blue for the shading of the metallics instead of just plain black. I used super dark blue. It was probably blue liner, because we all know I love blue liner here, right? If you haven't been to the show before, get some blue liner. It's one of the best Reaper paints. And then I also decided to paint the leather kind of a dark blue, bluish black. And then the other color difference is on the bases. So I just did like green grass, which you might, if you were used to always doing your bases the same for your game, and if you have made a choice that all of the, you have a unit or an army and they should all be based the same, because that's part of what makes them look like a unit or an army. But if you're doing more role-playing figures, they don't have to have all the same bases. I mean, you might in one encounter use this guy in a cave, and another encounter use him in a forest. You can choose to do just like a plain boring base. I know some people like to do that, or they like to do clear bases or black bases. But typically what I do is just, I'm going to pick something that fits the figure and not worry about, look how tiny the amount of base is. I'm not going to really care that much if the scenario I'm playing is, I put the guy with the gray base on grass one day. It's not going to be the end of my world, but different people have different preferences for their game, what they find immersive in a game. So I'm not telling you what to do on that front, but from a, if you brought this to ReaperCon and we were giving critique, the green is, it's not just that it's green, but it's a saturated green. And he's pretty saturated. I mean, that's a nice bright orange. It's certainly attention drawing, but I'm pretty sure, like, if you cover up the right side with your hand and you look just at the left side, your eyes are going to probably pop down to that base. Where if you do the reverse and you cover up the left side and you're looking at the guy on the right, you're not going to spend much time on the base. Like, you might flick down there and then start looking back at the face and the chest and the more interesting, pertinent parts of the figure. Where I think on the left, the brightness of the green is distracting. So green, orange, and purple are a color triad, so it's not as eye-catching as a complement. Complements are directly across from one another on the color wheel, so like red and green. But the three colors that are evenly spaced apart, so it's blue, yellow, red, and then green, purple, orange are the two big triads. Those still have a decent amount of contrast. Even though the purple isn't here, it's still, the green is cool, the orange is warm. There's still a fair amount of color and temperature contrast, which draws our attention. So, particularly since the orange is right up against the green. The most contrast is created where you have, hey Zachariah, the different elements directly adjacent to one another. So contrast is things that differ from one another, basically. We tend to use the word and think about it. It's just, being darker in the shadows and lighter in the highlights. But contrast is just difference. So that difference can be value. It can be making something darker, making something lighter. It can be hue, which is the orange and the blue are complementary colors. So I'm trying to help keep the viewer's eye spending more time in the upper half of this figure by using the contrasting blue on his accessories, but it's a fairly dull dark blue so that it's not going to draw too much attention, where the other one has that bright light colored green right next to the orange down at the base, and nothing to counteract that further up. So using like a khaki green on the leather for that one might have worked, or even if I'd made it like a dull dead kind of green on the bottom, it wouldn't be as distracting. It probably wouldn't be ideal, but it wouldn't be as distracting. And talking about green, this matters for scatter and flock and grass type materials as well, where you don't necessarily control the color. You can sometimes shift the color, so you can like add a wash over static grass, or you can like dry brush the tops of it. But I would have a similar problem if I painted like a gritty dark brown, orangey brown figure, and then I put them on bright green static grass. People are going to be spending way too long. Way too much of their attention is going to be on the base of the figure, which is probably not what I want to talk about. Let's go back to this guy. So some of the other figures in here, this is going to be one of them. I did a Learn to Paint kit for Bones 5. It hasn't been re-released. The content is not, like the text content is not significantly different from the core skills kit that is available on the website right now. The main difference was I had 12 paints, and they were kind of picked to be a broad color spectrum, so like a red, a green, a blue, a yellow, that kind of thing, where I don't pick the colors for the Learn to Paint kits that way necessarily. So there's not, if you get the new expansion sets, so you get core skills and then core skills expansion, you'll have more of a complete color selection. But when I picked the colors for the Learn to Paint kits, my emphasis was on how do we paint these three figures and learn the techniques that are in the kit, more than if I were just buying something and I wanted to get all the basic colors, which maybe should have been how I thought about it, but that is not how I thought about it. But the one for Bones 5 was more like that. There were 12 figures, 12 colors, and then I was using similar techniques. So I had to paint the 12 different figures just with those colors, and I wanted to put as much, different moods and types of characters and types of color schemes and stuff in there as I could. I guess that's the one thing that's in there that's not really in the others, but I don't talk about that explicitly. I just say here, mix this many drops of this to that, and you get these colors. But I thought these would be good figures to go through because they're all dry brushing and washing. So they're all using the same techniques. They pretty much all have no more than 3 steps of dry brushing. And they're all working with like the same basic color selection, and I painted them at the same time. So if you think about a lot of variables on what we're going to compare on the figures, all those things are the same. So a lot of what's going to be different about these figures, make one work better than the other, visually speaking, comes just down to color and which colors and where they're being placed. But then we can also look at what are things we could do to improve these. If this was something that I saw in the MSP Open, and the person who painted it approached me later and asked for a critique. So the color scheme on this one, speaking of triad color schemes, is blue, yellow, red. In this case, the yellow is gold metallic, which is and the yellowy brown color. So when you use those kinds of triads, and I think I've gone through some figures that I've painted on the show where I've talked about, you don't have to use the colors that the color wheel shows you. It's just, you're looking at color families when we talk about stuff like, green, red color contrast, or a blue, red, yellow triad. So in this case, the metallic is yellowy. It works fine. I think this is one of the ones that I'm happier with. I think he works pretty well. I think the main thing that I would suggest for this is, if I'm looking at this and someone else painted it, I might detail the base a little bit more. I mean, that's in terms of you're putting it in a contest. Obviously, for day-to-day use, that's not necessarily important. And Erin hasn't seen this figure before, and I'm trying to remember what his name is and coming up blank. I'm pretty sure he was out in metal before he was made in bones. I feel like not all, but almost all of the ones in the kit were metal first. But I bet that someone in the chat is going to be able to find this guy whose name completely escapes me. If I could see the names of my files, it would probably tell me. But I cannot, alas. Although I don't think I knew all their names when I painted them. So sometimes I just name them whatever I want, and I never really learn their names. But he's pretty cool. I mean, he's got, I don't know if you can see it from this angle, but he's got like a book on his hip. And then there's some little skulls on the other hip. And so he's like a nice mix of detail and not so much detail that it's getting too busy for your eye. The face doesn't stand out as much as I would like to see in a figure. So if you think about, like, why are we even painting figures? And I don't think we think about it this way very often. Like, we'll say because it's more realistic, or because real life is in color, or like we kind of phrase it in terms of realism or making things look cooler or more exciting. And that's true. But if you really get down, like, why do we have to paint the guys? We're trying to show the viewer something. We're trying to make something clearer to the viewer. We're trying to communicate visually with the viewer. And you can do that on a few different levels, but kind of the base level is just the facts. Like, you're giving a report to the police. Like, you've got to describe the basic elements of this is what this is what their skin tone was, this is their hair, this is what color their clothes were, stuff like that. So that's kind of like the basic level of what we're doing. We should be able to look at a figure and kind of get some idea of who or what they are and what they're doing from a quick look. And the way we use color and where we put it is a big part of how we do that. Then you take it to the next level. What are we trying to communicate with the viewer? Then maybe we want to communicate a certain type of character or a certain type of mood or a story. We start getting into more things we're trying to say instead of just what the sculpt is trying to say. And it uses all the same kind of elements. You just kind of refine how you're using those elements. Zachariah is stealing something for class if I let him. Circumstantial evidence. Yeah. Trash Rama, give this meeting a new name. I can't find him. Am I delusional? Did he not come out before? I don't know. I bet if somebody goes to like the Bones Kickstarter 5 page, they'll be able to find him on there and figure it out maybe. Because all of the figures that were in the Learn to Paint kit were elsewhere in the Bones 5 Kickstarter, I believe. So yeah, you got to start with the... Think of the showing who or what they are and what they're doing as the foundation. Like you're making a house, you're building a house. If you build your house and you put the kitchen next to the master bathroom or master bedroom, and the bathroom is in the attic, like this is not a house anyone wants to live in. This doesn't make sense. It's all over the place. And we can inadvertently end up doing that if we jump ahead and we're thinking about, oh, I want to make cool NMM and I want to paint some detail or freehand or something over here, and I love this color pink, and we're not thinking about it as an overall thing. So it's an overall person or creature or object that exists in a world, and all of it is being lit by the same light, all of it is being, it's in the same air, is being affected by the same thing. It's a holistic thing, so it should look like it all belongs in the same universe, but we need to make choices that help the viewer see the big picture. It's like, okay, he's got armor, he's got some cloth, he's got some accessories, he's a person. He's not fighting right now. He's just got his weapon on his shoulder. So that's kind of like just the facts thing. And then I can get into, okay, he's very stern. He's an honorable warrior type of character, or he belongs to a national army. And then I can start picking the colors based on that army. I mean, you could make this guy look evil by changing the colors. So instead of that blue, you have, like a drearier color, or like or just black or something like that. You can affect a lot of the mood stuff with your color choices and whatnot. But in terms of I need to see what's going on, that is going to be the same situation. Like you're going to want that same foundation of your house, like where the rooms are that make sense for you to navigate a house, and then how you decorate it is totally different. But how you build the house, there are similar ideas there. So choosing your colors and where you put them. There we go. Yes, Thregan Helm Splitter is the name of this character, and it's 03915 on the Reaper store, and it's one of the Dreadmere heroes. So Dreadmere is one of the areas in the world of Reaper, Adon, and you can tell from the name. I don't know that there are any happy places in the world of Adon, but you can tell from the name that this is not one of them, if there are happy places. So the main thing that I would be less happy with, that I would comment on, like, okay, what could we do to improve him? I could add a little more definition with some dark lining. So you see where the pouch, the little flap on top of the pouch meets the body of the pouch, that's not very well defined. At this size of picture, you can see that. But if you imagine holding a guy that's 1.5 inches out from you, at the end of your arms and looking at him, you wouldn't see that detail on the pouch. Is that critical? No, but it does help enhance the figure. So dark lining would be the first thing I would suggest. It's not critical on this one, but it would definitely help in a few places. And then the second issue I have is that his face kind of ends up not being the focal point of this figure. And that's one of the challenges sometimes of painting darker skin, is how do you make it the focal point? So surrounding it by lighter value things can help, because you're doing that contrast. You're having a lighter value in the clothing and the accessories, and then that contrast between the darker skin and the lighter accessories will help draw the eye. In this case, what I think would help is to add a little more contrast. So I kept myself confined to what I thought someone who was learning how many steps they might be willing to take. But I would add like another step or two of dry brushing, just to get like the tips of his nose, under the cheeks, the top of the head. Like just a few steps more, a few seconds more really, would do it. And then if you thin down that red and we like put it on the end of the nose or his cheeks, that helps get some saturated color up into the face, and I think that would help as well. So that's that guy. Now I'm gonna have to sneak through some snakes to get to whatever the next figure is, because I had very little control over the order, so I don't know. I'm very happy with this guy, who I believe is called Young Mage. I think I do know the name of this one, but let's see. He's not going to be the next one, so we'll get to the front of him eventually. This is, it starts with an L. This was one of the anniversary figures. So it came out in metal as an anniversary figure, and then it was added, not Lorena, Larissa? I'm going to say Larissa. I'm going to take a shot. So I don't think you can buy it in metal anymore. That was a limited release, but now this Bones version is available. And I tried to paint the same color scheme that I had painted for the anniversary one within the limits of the colors I had. So in the original one was much more of a celery green. I guess it wasn't as saturated, because part of my limitation with, could I mix a celery green? Probably, but I didn't want to make any mix too complicated for someone who's new to painting and new to color mixing. So I want to keep the ratios fairly, like a bit of this and a bit of that, not 3 drops of this, 2 drops of that, a half a drop of, like, at a certain point it's a lot and people don't want to deal with it. The burgundy color, I think, is actually probably pretty similar to the original, and I had painted her with blonde hair and this dragon. Somewhere I have a side-by-side picture of these two, but I guess I wasn't able to find it. Because that's what I was talking about with the house foundation. The color scheme works on both of them. The dragon is not as vibrant or as light in value of a green, and the gold on the dragon isn't as light in value as her hair, so he stays a secondary character in the scene, and you look at him, but you spend more time looking at her, which is what I would want to accomplish. So the other one, I mean, I did like very fancy texturing that took hours and hours and hours on the skirt. And there's obviously, there's a lot more contrast, and I spent a lot more time on the hair. But as a house foundation, so that's a very well decorated house. This is maybe your college apartment, but it still works. So it's like everything's still in a sensible place. It functions well as a house because of I did all right with the color traces, which I don't always. I'm not always great at thinking about that stuff that I said myself, that you've got to step back and think about it as a whole, and what are you trying to communicate? And I'm actually pretty terrible at doing that. I'm trying to get better at it. But every now and then I get it right. Pendrake says she has a very Snow White Disney princess vibe. I agree. And I think that's why I wanted to paint her when she first came out, because I enjoy painting, pretty girly, non-fighting in the forest colors now and then. So, I mean, that is one big thing. This looks very dry brushed. If I were someone who was wanting to improve, I would start exploring layering if I wanted to paint this type of figure. There's not a lot of texture here. Dry brushing does not do rolling cloth folds any favors, nor the wash. So it's not terrible. I mean, like, if I put this out on a game table, I'd be perfectly happy with that. But in terms of if I'm giving someone feedback and they're trying to improve, that is something definitely that I would look at. The contrast on the green dress is pretty good. I feel like her skin needs a lot more depth in the shadows, even though she's quite pale. And people do this a lot with pale skin, where they don't really add many shadows because they want them to be pale. But if that light is not going to be falling on her cheek to the side there, because she's got her head tilted, her hair's hanging over it, there are going to be shadows there. It doesn't matter what the original value of her skin is, there it should be darker there because the light isn't reaching it. Likewise in her hair, blonde hair, if you go look at photos, there are places where it's quite dark, where you see, like, close to the part line, or where it's hanging over the side of the face. I mean, it can get not walnut brown, but like shield brown value, or even a bit darker. And this hair doesn't have any of that. So it's got a wash, and the wash helps bring out some of the strands. But if I were a little more directional, you can see a bit more here. And it's a little darker here, and I don't know if some of that's the photo even. But a lot of people painting blonde hair, especially when they're at an earlier stage, they would probably not even go this dark. But Tristan, yes, thank you. I know who did I think Larissa was? The updated sculpt doesn't seem to be available currently. Oh, I would not be surprised if they were going to convert her to Bones USA, and I think that that'd be cool. The detail would look really nice in Bones USA. So my apologies if you can't get this figure currently, but as like Inara, I bet a lot of you have her in a box somewhere from Bones 5. Dark lining would help here too. You can see where her sleeve meets her hand. It looks kind of rough, and that often happens at color transitions. So it won't be as dramatic if the color that is meeting the other color is very dark. So where the dragon's tail meets her sleeve, where the burgundy part of the sleeve meets the underdress, it doesn't look as janky there because that's a really dark color next to a lighter color. When you have a lighter color and a lighter color that are side by side, or even, you know, medium value color and a lighter color side by side, you get that kind of look that's happening here, and it looks sort of rough and unfinished. And no matter how precise you are as a painter, it's really hard to get that line sharp. It's just so much easier to take a darker color. I would probably have used a darker brown to go with the skin tone. You could pick a darker green to go with the sleeve, and add that in. So you can see it here from the front too, and it would help cover up that mold line that's on the top of the hand if I did that as well. You can see the same problem on her other sleeve as well. But for the most part, because of the washes, there's enough contrast between the one surface and the other that it doesn't do it a lot on this figure. Whatever that thing is on her hip is another place where, if you look closely at that, it looks like it's not one clean edge next to one clean edge, and adding dark lining would make that so much easier. Well, I know, so there is one difference in this kit, because I did not think of this when I did the first kit. When I had people do the accessories on this, so if you look at the little jewel that's at her waist, all that kind of stuff for this, her necklace, I had people paint it black and then do the metallic on top, so essentially they're dark lining. So this looks better than, excuse me, something that someone wouldn't have dark lined at all. So I kind of treated it a little. Inara says, I believe the 25th anniversary figures didn't go to retail. You had to get them with each month's order. So they did not sell them individually at all, like the way they do the monthly figures now? I can't remember. If they did, or if it was, sometimes retailers seem to figure out ways to get the bonus stuff, but yeah, they're not necessarily just going to be in every store. It would have to be someone that does high volume or jumps through hoops to get it. So oh, there's another angle of her. As with many limited edition things featured in the show, it is currently available in the UK. Really? Okay. Well, so UK people win for once? Go UK people. That is another angle of this guy. Oh, so you can see some more of the detail in the sculpt. And it's working. That thing that I said where I painted all the detail black first is definitely helping this guy, because those little skulls and the shield and the belt buckles, painting all of that black and then going in with the other color is a less stressful way of doing dark lining for little details like that, I think. Oh, we get to see the back of him now. And this kind of fold, it dry brushed up pretty nicely. I mean, it's not perfect. If someone were entering this in a contest, I would probably say, okay, maybe it's time to go get the layer up kit and experiment with that, or, you know, watch some videos on wet blending some other techniques where you can get smoother transitions on smoother surfaces. This is Tara, who was also one of the 25th anniversary figures. So there are different versions of Tara the Silent. Actually, I think there are 2 versions of Tara the Silent in here. No, this one isn't one of the 25th anniversary figures, is it? Now I'm not sure. There are so many versions of her. That's why I'm not sure, because I've painted a few different ones as well. Metal, then Bones USA. Okay. So it sounds like this one is available, but if you type Tara the Silent into the Reaper store, you will get multiple options in return. Quindy is linking to the Bones Black Tara. And I think the bottom of this figure, minus the crossbow, is originally from Anwin. That was a metal figure, and I don't know if she's out anymore, but she was playing a flute. So it was like a bard type character, who I've also painted. So I painted like 3 versions of Tara, and then, no, this was a 25th anniversary figure, because I started out with a color scheme kind of like this, and then Ron was like, because I was thinking of like a ranger type character, and he's like, no, this is Tara. She's like, blah, blah, blah. So I had to change it to blue. Which somewhere on my blog, there's a series of 4 articles where I go through the painting process, and I talk about that. Like I roughed in some colors, and Ron and I agreed that it wasn't working, and I changed it. And then, at the end of 3, I'm like, okay, here's my almost final photos. What did I find to fix? And then part 4 is me going through what I tried to fix. So the that series of articles is kind of like a chronicle of what I would do if I were painting more of a display figure for a contest. And it didn't completely work. Like, I'm not totally happy with that figure. I'm not sure that I got the foundation exactly where I wanted it, but it runs through kind of the thought process of putting more effort into a figure, I guess. But then since I had the opportunity to paint this one again, I thought, well, why don't I experiment with that color scheme that I originally wanted to do, and see how that works. And I'm trying to think if this is the one. There was one of the, you guys have seen this trick before, because I think I did, even a couple weeks ago, I did if you take yellow and you mix a little bit of black in, you get khaki. So one of the figures in this doesn't have any green in it. It's yellow and black, and I think it might be this one. So overall, I think it works. This is an example of, and this is what I like the young mage for too, having like one more saturated color, and then using more neutral, less saturated colors around it. If you're nervous about color, or you're painting something quickly, I think that can be a visually effective way to do it. You're less likely to get colors that don't play nice. I mean, I did pick the accessory colors. I think it is kind of a purpley brown, and then her skin, is a bit of an orangey skin. So technically it's a green, purple, orange triad. But if you think about things in terms of having one color that's more of a color, and then you're picking some browns and grays and stuff that goes with it, if you're nervous about color, or you're trying to paint something fast, I think that can be a nice visually effective color scheme. Again, dark lining. You can see where her foot meets the ground. Some of that stuff that I was talking about when we talked about basing a few weeks ago, it just doesn't really look as real as it would if there was a little bit of a shadow, darker area around her feet that kept the stone being in the stone instead of, some of the dry brushing getting on her foot. Did I not do a wash on the crossbow? I don't know. The crossbow looks like it could use a little more detailing, but overall, because of the color selections, the wash works for bringing stuff out. Other than, you could get things a little crisper doing dark lines, like it would make it look a little neater and crisper, but I wouldn't say that this one needs it, other than cleaning up that bit of the foot. So here I would say mainly it's a technique thing, where using a technique that you can get smoother blending with would have made her face look nicer. Brighter lipstick, I think. Like just a little highlight, like not necessarily the whole lipstick being bright red or something, but adding just a little bit of lighter value on the lower lip is very natural. Like our lower lip typically does get light. The upper lip kind of folds in, like when I looked at the snake body earlier, it underhangs. So that the upper lip, you usually don't paint an upper lip unless you really want a lipsticky look. You just put like a dark line between, and that mimics the shadow, and then you paint the lower lip. But if you can manage the brush control to get a little highlight or two on that lower lip, it can make a big difference. And it doesn't have to be like super light colors. Like I didn't do her as a made-up character. Like she doesn't really look like she has cosmetics on. So I wouldn't go like super bright and shiny and try and make it look like she's got lip gloss on or something. But just a little bit, because her face, there's so much, the light isn't reaching the bottom of her face very much with the way the pose of her head and the way the sculpt is. So adding a little bit of lipstick there, or I mean a little bit of reflection on the lower lip would help draw more attention there, and definitely more highlights on the hair, regardless of whether you're dry brushing or layering or whatever thing. I'm sure that I have at least one show about painting hair, and I definitely have on my website. If you just go to the main page, you scroll down a little, there should be a how to paint hair, and that links to a video that I did for Reaper, like way back in the early days when we first started doing videos at Reaper. So there's the back. The hair doesn't look as bad from the back because you can see there is some of that highlighting up around the crown. The video and website that I'm talking about will explain all about where you put the highlights on hair. But I feel like I did not give the metallics a wash, and I definitely should have. No, that's actually like a light. That's true. It's cream. So the bit, the wraps around the bow and then the fletching on the arrows are like a light value paint, and I probably didn't put enough of a wash on there or something. But let's see who's next. This is, I want to say, Siobhan, who is also a Dreadmere character. She's a vampire. And was there, I think I was going from 2D art for this one, not from a painted miniature, a previously painted miniature, but I could be wrong. This is actually, if you got this kit, I think this is one of the more complicated ones to paint. I definitely do not recommend starting with this one. Because to reach the different areas, even though it doesn't seem like there's a lot of color variation, but to reach one part and not get paint on the other part, you kind of have to do it in different steps. So but this was an opportunity to try to translate that 2D art, which maybe somebody can find a link to the 2D art. Siobhan, vampire, something. Somebody Google that and see if you get a link to some art. And I made a few changes, I think, but overall I kept it. It's, I think I used purple in some of the shadows. So on her hair, it's kind of purpley, and then that rope line thread that's across her throat, I think that's purple. There's a couple other things that are purple. So this is an example. Vampires are great for that whole foundation thing, that drawing attention and focus and creating mood. It's all built into a vampire color scheme, because it's just like super pale face and dark around them. So the eye just is going to go to the face. And you're building in that mood. If you're using, black or purple, or in this case, like the red, it's going to build in the mood of the character pretty easily. So that's one of those reasons why, if you're like, how come sometimes, a character turns out really good and other times they don't, there are some kind of, I don't know if I want to say tropes or stereotypes, but there are some classic character types and color schemes that work so well you don't have to think about it, and you're not analyzing why they work. And then when you go paint a character that's maybe a little more ambiguous or not as well defined culturally, you have to make more of the choices, and then it gets tougher. So I'm not saying this like her face looks a little weird because of the dry brushing and washing. This is not like an optimal painted figure, but it's very visually effective, I think, as a color scheme. I don't know if the gold on the chest, I feel like maybe I should have made those little decorations right near her face gold as well. And maybe one other thing, the skull on the shield. It's good if you use a color to use it like 3 to 4 other places. And if it's a color that's used in a small amount like that, you can use it as a way to bop people's eyes around. So I feel like my eye, looking at it now, is kind of just stopping on the shield. I mean, on the chest. And if I use some of the, because there's 2 colors on there that aren't anywhere else on the figure. So there's the brown and the gold. So like all the warm yellowy colors are down at her foot, which in this case, the foot is part of the story of the figure. Like, I'm not totally going to be upset that some time is spent there. Siobhan Red Raven, 3975 is this figure if you wish to go buy one. But I think you can see what I mean, where if I use some of that gold color up closer to her face and maybe one other place, it would help keep your eyes circling more. Where I think right now, there's a little tendency to maybe get stuck down by that chest longer than there should be. I think we start at the face, or at least the upper torso. Well, torso, not the upper torso. The whole upper part is the torso. But as the eye is moving around, I think it gets stuck on that chest a little too long. So color selection is solid here. The washes did a good job of bringing out, you can see there's some detailing on the shoulder pad. She's got a neat texture on her gloves. But on the smooth areas, it looks a little off again. And the hair would be more interesting if it was, this is what I talk about in that hair video. The sculpt of hair is very vertical. It's the strands going down. But if you look at someone's head of hair, the reflections and shadow pattern, the light and dark pattern from the light reflecting off the hair and then areas where it's shadowed are more horizontal. So there'll be like a band around the crown of the head. There'll be a band where the hair goes over the shoulders that's lighter, and then corresponding darker areas. So painting that way tends to look a little more natural than this, which is, I did a shadow wash that goes into the crevices that have been sculpted, and then I did dry brushing on the parts that are upper facing. And Inara is correct that this was a Reaper figure. I think she's another Dreadmere person. So you can see more of the hair here. And I did a little bit of where the hair dips down at her neck, I didn't add as much highlights there. So I was trying to do it within the confines of the dry brushing and washing idea. And the back of this cloak actually dry brushes up pretty well. But you can see on the base here when I was talking about Thorgan. What was that guy's name? Thregan Helmsplitter. I can't remember things. 2 seconds even. When I was talking about do a little more on the base, I kind of mean like what we have here. I don't know why I didn't do this on his base. I thought I did everybody's bases kind of the same, but who knows? This was a long time ago. This is another red, yellow, blue triad. But you can see that there's, even though it's the same kind of base guide color scheme, the effect isn't the same as on Thregan. So the red's pretty similar in both of the examples of that color scheme. I used the saturated red, but I did a toned down tan for the yellow and then a gray blue for the blue. So that's an example of how you don't have to do the color wheel versions of those colors to do that kind of color scheme, where Thregan was much more the color wheel version of those colors. The ground, with my aim was to make it look like sand, is also part of the yellowy color scheme. And I'm pretty happy with this guy, actually, who is Ogana 30066. I cannot remember what he came out before in metal, I think, but I cannot remember. I don't think it was 25th anniversary, but I don't feel like he was a ReaperCon guy. Oh, the metal version is available. So there you go. He came out in metal and is still available in metal. And the main issue with this guy is a similar thing with Regan, where the face is not standing out enough. And even I would say the chest, like the whole kind of, now I do mean the upper torso, because I feel like that should be the center of our attention, unless something about the sculpt or the story or some decision you're making says otherwise, like just not a default character type person that, upper third or fourth of their body that the face is in is the center of attention on the front version. The back version, since there's no face, you can make different decisions. And similar solutions would work. Highlight it higher, and maybe add a little red on his lips. I don't mean red, like it doesn't have, not like the cloak. I'm not saying give the guy lipstick, but even just a touch of red would help. And you may be using some of that yellow in the highlights on the head and the upper chest, not everywhere, would help. Then I'm incorporating some of that color contrast right on the figure. If you even go further and use some of the dark blue in the shadows, you can use the contrast of that triad within an area. It doesn't have to be between areas. You can also use the contrast of triads and complementary colors within a section on a figure. So hopefully that makes sense. This again was a type of sculpted cloth that dry brushed up really well. The sword is not. I would have preferred doing the kind of thing I talked about on the Nagenra, where I was layering on shadows with the wash instead of just putting on a wash and letting it go wherever it wants. The bot is reminding us about the 25th Quarterly Community Contest and where you can go to get that, which is no longer on Facebook. There's now a link. I'm going to read it out, actually, since it's not too complicated. It's woobox.com/6QPZ6T. And everybody paints the same figure for that. And then at the end, all of the pictures go up and people vote. And I think the ones that get the top 3 votes, and you can vote for more than one, so you vote for all the ones you like. You don't have to just pick like the one out of the entries that you like the most, which is good because I'm very indecisive, so I don't like that. I don't like when I have to pick just one. I like when I can go, oh, I like this one and this one and this one. But the people who get the top 3 most votes win, I'm going to say gift certificates, but the person who comes in number 1 picks the figure that gets painted in the next one. So that's always fun. And I think it's interesting to see how different a figure can look based on the decisions people make about color and the setting and those kinds of things. It's really fascinating to see and that's a great way to see how those choices make such a difference, is when you have a bunch of people painting the same figure. The mini for this one is going to be Terrazinia, which is 30093, and I'm blanking. I feel like I should know what that figure looks like. Necromancer? Is that a Necromancer? Am I totally off base? Now here, the feet kind of go into the base a little, but I think it's okay because it's sand. It's not a solid surface. So here I might not want to have like a super clear dark line definition or shadow type thing between the feet and the surface to convey the idea that the ground is not a solid surface. Terrazinia is a necromancer, and there are 3 different sculpts. I assume everybody's sculpting or painting the same one of those 3 different sculpts that I just told you the number of. So it's not, you can't use any Terrazinia. You have to use 30093. Who is next? This is feel like she's just called Noblewoman, but I could be off base. And Jen Greenwald painted the original version of this, which, again, I don't feel like was one of the special edition figures or anything, so I'm pretty sure is available, but I could be wrong. When I was going through all of the figures for the kit, yeah, I mentioned that I wanted to work through different colors and experiment with different things, and this was the least combat specific environment type. This was the opportunity to use fine clothing type colors and more feminine type colors. Yeah, her name is Noblewoman. I remembered one correctly, and she's 30073 for bones and 3955 for metal. Which the metal one probably has the picture of Jen Greenwald's painted version. So I took this as the opportunity to make some pinks and teals and purples and have fun with that. I don't know if it's a little too much. like there's a lot of saturated color there. I think that it might have been a little more effective if I'd picked and used colors like that but toned them down in some of the spots. So like maybe have the teal and the purple, but the pink be more of a dusty rose or a faded pink, or vice versa. Keep the pink vibrant and do the other two a little more pastel. I think there's too much of the same saturation on this figure. I'm also not sure that the purple was the best choice for the feather. That pink is really drawing my eye a lot. I think if the feather were also that pink, it would help your eye move around a little more, like we talked about before. Unfortunately, neither of the noble women in the store have the picture of Jen's very nicely, more nicely painted than this. I did not try to follow her color scheme at all, because this was my opportunity to do the girly colors. But I think you can see what I mean, that it's a lot. Actually, maybe her hat should have been, or turban, should have been the same pink. But she does suffer from a similar problem that some of the other figures have had, that her clothes very much overshadow her skin. That's one of the challenges with skin. Skin is more neutrally colored. It's not high saturation. So that's one reason we have to use the contrast of value on the skin. So higher highlights here, but in very small areas, would pop her face out so much more. And then I think also it probably would have worked better. Like if you kind of squint your eyes, the face and the turban disappear into one another. So if I'd used the lighter, brighter color of the pink or even the purple on the turban, that would have, because the teal contrasts well with her face and it does help get our eye up there. But I think the pink is probably like the most eye-catching of the colors, so maybe I should have used that on the veil and the teal on the dress, and had a lighter color on the turban, and also even a lighter color on the feather, maybe, or the jewel. What? I can't even. Did I forget to paint the jewels? It's entirely possible I forgot to paint the jewels. Well, there you go. Behind the scenes secrets. Pendrick says, now she looks sumptuous, like she's going to shop in the Kasbah to get ready for a big banquet at the palace. She should have a squad of footmen with her, maybe Oswald. She could have Oswald and his girlfriend to carry the extra bags. What's her name? Marina. Oswald and Marina. And she definitely needs someone carrying all her stuff, because there's no way she's carrying all her stuff. She is ready. Like, you don't come at her. She is ready. She's got that dagger may not be purely decorative. And then adding that little, she is wearing lipstick, so I could add a very bright highlight on the bottom lip, and that would help. If she was sculpted in such a way that there was more of a eyelid area, using a nice saturated color for eyeshadow is a way to help get some more attention onto a darker skinned face as well. So like those kinds of cosmetics look really good on dark skin, and they help you draw more focus to the face. So let's see if we get the back view. We do. And I kind of feel like, yeah, if the pink weren't there, maybe it would be a little less. But hey, it's not like everyone who has the money. Really, that's what, silks and satins, and they're all displays of wealth. So a person like that, Pendrake is absolutely correct, would not necessarily want to look tasteful. They'd want to be saying, hey, look how rich I am. I've even got like thread of gold on my trim and whatnot. This is also Tara, I think. Or she might just be called Archer or something in the... That's it. So part of the body is kind of like a Tara, one of the Taras, but then the rest of the sculpt is different. So she has kind of a generic job name, like Archer, Ranger, something like that. This was one of the first ones I painted, actually, from doing this set. And when I discovered that the colors I had selected, it was very hard to make a rust color without, like a rusty reddy brown, without doing a lot of steps. So this is actually another red, yellow, blue triad color scheme, with the yellow being the gold and the blonde hair and the tan wood. And then it's like a weird salmon-y red. Because I liked the idea of that color of armor, and that's as close as I could get. And then I thought, well, it's kind of different. It's one of those things where it's not a color scheme that I would necessarily have chosen looking at bottles. I got there from mixing, and I ended up liking it. So that's why sometimes it's fun to experiment with different ways of doing color picking, I guess. And this one, I thought I was finished the figure, and I took the photo, and I was editing it, and I'm like, oh dang, I never painted all those little fleur-de-lis. So I really did do that on one, but apparently I might have done it on more than one, and I did catch this one before I sent Ron the photos, but I'm not sure that I caught the other one. The gold is very eye drawing. I don't think it's too dire, because there is some of it up here, and her face is partly shadowed. I mean, she's like a roguish person, it's not really a fade into the shadows kind of color scheme. So I don't know what the rationale that I had was for that, other than I was trying to make a rusty brown, and that's what happened. So does it work as a color scheme in terms of conveying the character? Is there enough information here to tell? I don't know. Because right now she's more like a noble person's guard or something like that. Where that's just their house sigil and their house colors. So on that front, like, maybe it works. But I would be happier if this were more of an antique gold or a copper. This is a very in-your-face gold that I feel kind of distracts from the rest of the figure. So you would need a wash, or to be different gold and just have that as the highlights, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not great. And I don't know what else I would recommend to kind of knock it up a notch. Probably another layer of, well, I was going to say highlighting, but I think maybe actually shading. So like deeper shadows on that leather color, I think would make it look a little, I don't know, it's a little plasticky or fake, or it's almost more like she's an actor dressed up as something than a something, I think is how I'm feeling about it. I will note that if you come to ReaperCon and you ask for feedback, I do try to filter my comments to be I'm not out to like gouge out anyone's heart. I'm happy to do that on my own stuff because I can, and I don't mind. So I'm very unfiltered and unvarnished when I talk about, I'm doing a critique on my own things. I do try to keep in mind that people have feelings when I'm looking at other people's things. This is one of the ones where I think the foundation of the house is pretty good. It's a unpolished paint job, but the color choices I think are pretty effective. Again, it's that there's one dominant saturated color. You could maybe argue that the gold is a secondary saturated color. And then apart from that, it's mostly neutrals, and it's pretty effective. Then there's also pretty high contrast of value between the areas. And this is definitely something you can do to Kendrick said maybe that previous girl was wearing pleather, and that makes sense. That's what it looks like. But using high value contrast between areas is a great way of defining things and making it easier for the reader or the viewer to get just the facts. The description for the sketch artist kind of thing. So he looks great on that front, to me at least. There's a mix of warm and cool. There's a mix of neutral and saturated. And the different areas are broken up in such a way that you can just look at this really quickly and see what it is and what he's doing. No Time for Bull has subscribed for 46 months. Wow, thank you. The polish and the unfinishedness are the areas that I would look at this figure and think about what could be improved. So the white is kind of just the same everywhere. This is Gontar. That's true. I should remember that his name was Gontar. And 03879 is the metal version. So if you, the one area where I think the eye is kind of getting distracted is those little white bird skulls on his boots. And yeah, bone, is the bone going to be all the same color on all of those items that are bone on him? Yeah, but it doesn't have to be the same value of that color. So I could keep those bird skulls that are further down. They're not getting as much light. They're kind of underhung on their boots. I don't have to go up to pure white on those. I can keep them more of a light gray with maybe just a little touch of white here and there, and then have that bright, you see the gray color that's on the horns and the staff. If there was more of that on the skulls on the boots, they would kind of fade back a little. They'd still look like they were made of bone or whatever, the color that I decided bone was in this color scheme, but they wouldn't draw as much attention if they were a little darker in value and more similar to the other things that were lower down. I think that the skull on the waist also needs more shadows, but there it needs it to add more definition because it just kind of looks blobby. I don't know if we have another. Yeah, the other angle is going to be the back. I don't think I did any. I didn't have. There wasn't room in the little book to have like side views or whatever, so I don't think I even took any of that guy. But to me, the skull looks very blob, and if I added more definition with shadow, that would help define the forms and the shapes, the volumes, as people say. Because the horns are cylinders again, so they should be getting darker as they roll down. This is one of the downsides of relying on a wash, is that the wash isn't making the shadows where they should be based on the shape of that object or where I want them to be as an artist. So it works on the staff because there's texture in the horns, so it adds the definition there. I think there's a little more sculpted recesses on some of the upper parts of the skull, so there was a little more there. So just doing a wash works there. It doesn't work on the other one because gravity and the sculpt aren't that. I mean, it just doesn't always work because that's what forms shapes are. It's too rounded. The wash rolls off, even though light and dark light would have cast shadows there. I guess I'm saying wet paint isn't going to always do the same thing that light and shadow are going to do. So the more we start making those choices, the better we can make things look, because we're placing paint exactly where we want it to simulate those shadows. Similar thing, you could go a little, well, I mean, you could do this with dry brushing too. Go a little lighter up on the top of the chest and his face. And I would even go a little lighter with some yellow. So adding just a little bit of yellow, making it a little more saturated up there, or doing the reverse and making the green, as it gets lower on the body, less saturated. Which could be done, like you could just apply a bit of a wash over like the rib cage and the legs just to tone it down a bit more. It'd probably be possible to do that. And that helps draw more attention to the face. I would add more shade to his beard as well, but in that way where it's not about the strands, it's about the parts that are rolling kind of under and pushing out. So the parts pushing out and lifting up are going to get more light, and then the parts that are kind of rolling under are going to be darker. Let's see what it looked like from the back. You can see a bit of that with his hair, like there's more shadow lower down on the hair where it's kind of folding under with the cloak. So it works. The wash worked a little better on the back than it did on the front. But you don't have to leave it all to gravity. You can take that same thin down color, and once your first wash is dry, apply a few targeted washes where you want them to be. Is he a half orc? I feel like he's full orc, but I could be. I thought he was like Gontar orc shaman, but the name might just be up as Gontar, so I don't know if we 100% know for sure. The gray is, I mean, you guys have heard me talk about this like a million times, I guess. How I feel about neutral grays for stuff like fur and other things that are natural. So, and I think you're getting that effect here, that it's very blah looking. Like a real animal would never be a pure neutral gray. Pendrake has never seen this figure before. He was in the core of Bones 5, I think. Like, I think he was even in the very first beginning core before it got expanded or anything. Queenie says, it says orc shaman, orc druid, and the expanded search terms do have half orc, but I would not take search terms as gospel. No. But they, I mean, I like when the search terms are wider rather than narrower, so that they're including the most possible options of what I could be thinking of then, rather than excluding something that I might think fits what I'm thinking of. So, and even honestly, for the skulls, I don't think those should be pure white either. Yes, he was number 1006 in the Bones 5 core set. He has facial hair, orcs usually do not. Maybe you just have to be really, really old, and he's so unusual because he lived that long as an orc. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you that I know lore, and especially stuff that's in the monster manual. I'm a good player. I don't go snooping around the monster manual that much, other than when Ron asked me to paint things, and obviously that's not how I approach this, because I was trying to do the color thing. But and from the color thing, I was trying to make it simple, so the hair and the bone and the horn are all the same colors. If I were looking at this as a figure that I were trying to paint, and sometimes I think people who are beginning painters do it a little too much, where it's like, well, this is this leather pouch was made at a different time than these boots and this belt, so they all have to be different browns. And sometimes it's too much, like it's just all over the place, and then there's like no visual cohesion. And the idea that the light is unifying things is what you need to think about there, is that, okay, maybe there would be slight differences in, dye batches or wear patterns or whatever, but you can convey that in different ways. You can come back with a glaze and tint the color slightly differently, or you can paint this one where it looks more beat up than that one. But having a little more color unity in accessories is probably better than really getting too deep in your head about, well, it's a non-industrial world and everything was handmade and these things are all different ages. And it's like, don't go too far down that rabbit hole. But this is a situation where I'm actually saying the opposite, where I think there should be a little more color variation between the horn and the bone and the hair. That would help. And then even if, for this gray, if the wash were a dark brown and maybe you use something like linen white or blonde hair highlight or something to do some of the highlighting, that would be enough to introduce some non-neutral colors and liven it up a little. Like, it doesn't have to be blatantly brown gray or blue gray or whatever, just to have a little life in it, because just, you know, pure white, pure black, and the gray that you mix with those are very unnatural colors. So using them for a natural object is not something that I recommend. And that would be a way that, so I would keep the foundation, the idea of this is the saturated part, these are the value structure, but tweak the colors and then tweak some of the application of those colors is, I guess, if I were trying to condense my critique of this figure, what I would say. Also, like, way more of a wash on that gold. I really prefer starting with a darker value gold and adding some highlights, I think, is partly what I'm saying. This is a Cat Folk. I'm going to go ahead and say Ranger. I find that we finally have one that's a Ranger, but I could be wrong. And this one I was trying to do the other color triad, the orange, green, purple. And the purple in this case is the leather. If I were not mixing my own colors, I would have been using like Volcano Brown. I think, is Volcano Brown still? There used to be a whole triad. There was Volcano Brown, Ashen Brown, and I forget what the shadow color was called. And then we didn't have some of them, and then some of them came back, and then there was the recent cancellation. So I'm not sure where we are, but anyway, Volcano Brown, and if you have the other two, those are all purpley browns. Which, it's a weird color, and there's a lot of times you're going to be like, this doesn't fit what I'm trying to do. But in this case, it was what I wanted, because I wanted like an orange cat fur, and then I went with the green outfit. This is not one of my favorites of the I don't think, I mean, as a color triad that works. I don't think the way that I have chosen to apply it to this figure works as well as I might have liked. I think that green is way too saturated. I think this was one of the ones I did near the end, and I'd already done two kinds of desaturated greens for the Gontar and Terra. So I think I was kind of like, well, I think I have to do a brighter green, because there's a green in the thing, and I'm not sure I'd used the green in the kit yet. I might have used it for Gontar, but you mixed it with something. And then similarly, I hadn't really done anything with orange, so I thought I better do something with orange. Plus I have an orange cat. You never get to see him because he's so big I can't pick him up because of all my back problems. I don't know why I didn't get like an enormous cat until I was old and couldn't pick a cat up. Like, if that had been my cat in my 20s, that would have been great. Could have picked him up all the time. He hates being picked up, though. So from his point of view, that would not have been great. So I get why I picked these colors, but this is an example of the kind of thing that can happen when you're picking colors for reasons other than what works best on this figure. I think it's very clear that I did not choose what works best on this figure. The green and the orange where the eye is, I like that. That is eye-catching. But it would be more eye-catching if the torso armor, I can't remember the names of armor, if that was not also that green, that would probably be more effective. If it was darker, well, duller. I think duller, not darker. Even the orange, I'm not I'm spending too much time looking at the legs. I think the contrast between the green tunic, maybe that's the word I was looking for, and the orange on the legs is maybe too eye-catching. Oh, we do have the back view, and here there's a lot more texture, so the The orange looks better here because the highlighting and shading is more apparent and it breaks it up. So a wash and a dry brush worked well here on a textured area. It did not work here where the areas are less textured. Pendrick says, sometimes when you visit Griswold, the best armor option stat-wise is not optimally colored. Yeah, I think we've all been there where you're in a game and you're like, oh, this is better, but it looks so hideous. What do I do? I will often not pick the better. I played a game like way back in the day. So this is, EverQuest was out, and what was the other one? The other big one. Oh my gosh. I'm really blanking. There were like 2 big MMORPGs that were out back in the day. And then there was Asheron's Call, which was not the big one. But that's the one we played. Partly because it wasn't the big one, I guess. Was it WoW? This was before WoW. This is like way before WoW. This is literally 25 years ago. So there was EverQuest and... Well, I mean, there was Camelot or whatever that one was too. But that wasn't the big one. Ultima. Yeah, Ultima and EverQuest. And we played Asheron's Call, which I bet none of you have heard of. Because the thing that was kind of fun about Asheron's Call is it was like a non-traditional fantasy world. Like they just made everything up. So there were really only humans. There was just humans from different places. And then they had all these weird bug creatures and other things. So it wasn't like goblins and elves and all of those things. It was, which I think was the other thing that my husband liked about it. We were playing this because I lived in Canada and he lived in the US, and this was before unlimited calling. And we had some exciting phone bills. So after a while, we decided like we better just find an online activity. So we played Diablo, we played Asheron's Call, we played Dungeon Siege, I think. But Asheron's Call, when we first started, they had like, it was like randomly generated armor. So it could be any number of colors, body parts that it went on, stats, bonuses. And the heavy plate was like really divided up. It was like you had shoulder armor and upper arm armor and forearm armor. Like it was just a million pieces. But they had this like really bright shiny green that I loved. So I would just run around to all the stores. Because also when you sold stuff, the stuff you sold would stay in the store for like 10 or 15 minutes and someone else could come and buy it. It was a really weird game that they did a lot of things no one would ever do in a video game anymore. So I would run around all the stores and look for this shiny green armor that people might have sold. And the stats were terrible. No one wore that kind of armor. Everybody wore like a robe that you could just enchant with all these bonuses. And that made you an effective fighter. But I just loved the look of this stuff. So I spent a lot of time collecting it. I think I had another set of armor that was for actually playing the game. This was just for running around looking super cool and shiny and green. I won there was some kind of fashion contest or something. I think I actually won because I did eventually track down all of these armor pieces. And it was like, if you were too low in level, you wouldn't be able to see what it did. Like you wouldn't even be able to see the stats on it, but I could still buy it. It was such a weird game. The person who did the magic system, like the magic system was developed completely separately from the combat system. So it was just so weird. Everyone had to be at least partly a mage because you wanted the teleport spell to get, you wanted like town portal essentially. And a few other things to enchant the armor and stuff like that. My husband and I played very non-optimally. Even like after we joined a group and they're like, okay, the way you play this game is like so not obvious. Like you didn't want even stats. You wanted to be whatever your character, like if you're a warrior, you wanted your strength to be like 100 and you would let other stuff be 10 and just die repeatedly until you got good enough that it all worked out. But the way they had made the game, like you were actually kind of gimped if you were, and I tend to make a character that's more well balanced. I'm okay with I'd rather like not suck at some things and not be amazing at other things. But the way this game was set up, it was like, no, you need to be amazing at whatever your main thing is, and you just gotta suck at the other stuff. So like we rolled our characters, but we didn't go as extreme, and we never played as extreme. We did all the armor stuff that people, the min-maxers and people who optimize. I'm like the least optimized person. Whenever I look at magic cards, the ones I think are really stupid are the ones that other people take and make combos that win tournaments out of. So I'm like really bad at figuring that stuff out on my own. Anyway, if this character could find the rest of the shiny green pieces of armor, they might look better. But right now, since they only have the chest piece, it's not the greatest. But I think it's good for people to know that even those of us who supposedly know what we're doing, and I took a color scheme that's supposed to work. Like, this isn't out of the playbook color scheme, but where you put the colors and which values and versions, all of that makes a difference too. So sometimes something that seems like it should work doesn't always, and that happens to all of us. This is, oh golly, I have no... Bog something? Is that her official name? I don't know. I'm pretty sure I called the file Bog Witch, but I don't know for sure whether I made that up or if that is really part of her name. She was one of the ones I painted near the end too. I think there was a purple in the kit that I hadn't used yet, and also I like purple. This is kind of also the green, orange, purple triad done with less obvious colors than the previous version. So if the cat's fur had been more like the color on her staff, I think that, or if the armor had been more like the color on this lady's clothes. Tiana Lee's Bog Witch, 30065. Bog Witch, I got it right. I don't think I knew the first part of her name when I painted her. And I believe that Bob sculpted this, Barb Julie. I'm not sure they're with us today. I did want her to look creepy. So the whole creepy eye thing that was an intentional choice. It was also an intentional choice that I guess, let me know if you think, yep, Quindy and Julie are confirming Bob sculpted this figure. The gem on the top of her staff is a saturated green. I think it was actually white, and then I did a wash of the saturated green that's in the set over it. So it's a different green, and so is her eyes, than the green I used on her clothes. And that, it does clash. I did that as a deliberate choice. Whether that works or not, to a degree, is going to be one of those personal taste things. So I'm trying to use that color to look magical, to look out of place, to look different. Both on her eyes and on the top of the staff. So it clashes, but it does also do what I'm talking about. So does that work? I don't know. Kind of, maybe. You tell me in chat what you think. I'm trying to decide whether I think I should have swapped the color from her staff with her hair. I think that would have actually helped draw more attention to her face. She would have looked less sickly then. She's actually got like kind of a green wash on the skin. The green that you're seeing on the torso is not me missing with the dry brushing. I wanted her to look kind of weird and otherworldly and whatnot. Pendrake likes the staff. So, this was kind of experimenting with some stuff. I think I thought, see how nicely this dry brushes up? These are some really nice folds for dry brushing. Bob is good at that. I think I wanted her hair to kind of look like a more sickly, swampy kind of a deal. But now that I'm looking at it again, I feel like that orange color would help draw more attention to her face. Although certainly those staring eyes draw a bit of attention. I'm not sure that green for all the wraps works. I don't know. I like the purple a lot. I like the green for her eyes, but I don't know. Something isn't 100% to me with the color scheme, and I'm not sure. Quindy is AFK briefly, so go nuts, everybody. All right, who's next? This is... I feel like it's
It's not young mage. I was thinking of a different figure. This is a cleric, I think. This is Bobby, and I think this was actually like one of his characters that he played, but I'm not 100% sure. No, he is a mage, because there he's got a little familiar. That green blob that you can barely see, let's see if we can tell. Nope, that's not the back of him, because the back of him was way back. That's right. It's a little frog. It's hard to tell at this angle. But that's a little frog. So there is just a little bit of green on this figure because of the frog. But this is an example, and I've been meaning to experiment more with this idea of having one more saturated color and then using more neutral colors around it. I think this figure also works well from a breaking things up with value point of view. If you look at this in black and white, the clothing is actually all the same value. So that gray and that yellow in black and white, you can't tell really. It looks like it's all just the same, which I'm fine with because it's all clothing. It's not like we need to know exactly which, exactly where his leggings are versus the overcoat, whatever. From just the facts ma'am level, we don't need to know that much detail. We need to know he's a guy and he's wearing robes, and this part of robes and this part is accessories and this part is skin or whatever. And then the leather is much darker, so whether you look at it in black and white or here, it stands out really well. And then the staff wood is kind of in the middle. I think his hair is kind of in the middle too. So from a point of view of breaking up the light and the dark and then breaking up the color saturation, I'm pretty happy. This is one of the ones I'm happier with. And he works really well from the arm's length distance as well. Because when I had them all, I put them up on my shelf and I took a couple pictures, which unfortunately I don't think I included in this slideshow. And just the color schemes at arm's length were so much more effective on some of them than others. Like Thregan looked really good at arm's length. This guy, I think Shimon, the vampire one, and a couple others worked really well at arm's length. Some of the other ones was a little shakier. Actually, I think the pleather girl was, visually eye-catching from that distance, and it was mostly that is contrast of hue, because if you look at her in black and white, the values are very similar between the different things. There, it's the contrast between the hues, the color families, that makes things stand out from one another. So you don't always have to use the same kind of contrast, and you could double up contrast. So here we're doubling up in that the yellow is lighter and more saturated than the leather things, which are darker and less saturated. And then in full color, the yellow stands out from the gray because the gray is super desaturated. It's the most desaturated because it's just straight up gray. And here, I don't have a problem with it. It's not a natural thing. It's clothing that someone dyed. So it doesn't look unnatural or weird to me. It looks like a choice that this organization that this guy belongs to chose these as their colors. The green of both the frog and the staff seem a little subdued, but if I'd gone the other way, they'd be drawing your eye a lot away from the focal point. So that sometimes I think we end up in problems, because to do that, if I was doing that in a scenario where I wasn't like, okay, here are the simple colors that I'm picking for this thing, I might have picked more eye-catching colors, and that might have been a bad choice, because it would be drawing your eye away from the main story of the figure. You could, if this was in a diorama or you were interpreting the figure differently, and to you the frog is like a very important part of the story and you want it to be more eye-catching, like that's a valid choice. And then you would pick different colors and probably pose things a little differently and stuff. That would be a hard one to pull off, because if there is a face, we want to look at the face. So if things distract us away from the face too much, we don't enjoy that as much as viewers. So I think it would still have to be like a secondary focus. But there would be ways to do it, I think. And then the staff looks pretty ordinary. So like where here, I made the staff kind of, the staff and her eyes are kind of like looking, bouncing between those. That's really the focal point here. And that happens because the color is so much more vivid and lighter than the other colors on the figure. If I'd wanted his staff to look more magical or more compelling or draw your eye more, I would have needed to do something maybe not that extreme, but have, brighter highlighting or like a little hot spot or just a more vivid color there. But then if I start, this is Alec Young Mage. He apparently has a first name. I didn't know that. 3881 in metal. But I think if I had started, if those two areas were any more colorful, I think there'd need to be some of it somewhere else. Right now, they're not really drawing your eye too much, so you don't have to think too much about the fact that there's just these two spots that are green and nothing else is green, and that's very weird. If you would prefer this figure in Bones USA, he's no longer called Alec. He's just Young Mage. He's traveling under more anonymity, and it's 30074. So that's kind of like, I don't think we think about the color that way. Like we think, oh, I want this to be magic staff, so I should be doing this. But it's like, okay, but does it being a magic staff, does that go with the rest of the choices I'm making? Like, is that the focal point? Queenie says, seems very sus to me that he dropped his name. I don't trust him. Yeah, is he a young mage? Is he? No, he's not. He's something else. Maybe the frog's really running the show. This guy's just a distraction from the nefarious plans of this frog. If I had been painting this as a character, I might have added a little more variation in the accessories, like made that belt pouch a different color, or possibly the strap of it. So in terms of if this were a contest entry, I would probably suggest adding a little more, make that maybe a mid-value color or add a little texture variation. The face would benefit from a little more shading. I think it's a little flat. Oh wait, yeah, no, the back is somewhere, who knows where. We won't look at that today. We looked at it briefly. It's very clean because of the color choices, but certainly a little dark lining, like between the neck cowl and the shoulder cowl. I don't know what these things. The cape, the little shoulder cape. There are a few other places where it doesn't look as clean as it could, or as well defined. The texture on his staff. Those are things that if I went in instead of just relying on the wash, I could add a little more mantle. Thank you, Zachariah. That's what it is. I could add a little more detail and interest, like the X's, the threads or leather straps or whatever is tying his mantle together. Those could be a slightly different color. Or I could just add a little bit of more shading around them. Dark lining is often where shadows would fall. Like if you look at where the yellow neck piece meets the gray mantle, there should be a shadow there. Like I'm not saying dark lining just because that's how we define things on miniatures, although it works that way. It's also something that we're used to seeing in real life. We just don't think we are. So when you think of like where someone's sleeve cuff goes on their arm, if you look at that, you'll often see that it casts a little line of shadow. That's what dark lining is in a lot of cases. Sometimes we do it in places where it's not happening. We're exaggerating a little to add definition to the figure. But the core of it is adding little lines of shadow. If you put, like if you have a coffee cup right now, it's on the table, look at the bottom of it. There's going to be a little line of shadow where the coffee cup is touching the table. It's the occlusion shadow. The light can't get there at all. So that idea of things that overhang or touch one another, have a line of shadow between them, is in the real world. It is not just a thing that we're artificially telling people to do. And when I go to ReaperCon, I can almost guarantee that one of the pieces of advice that I'm going to dispense the most is dark lining. And people are going to be resistant about it because in our brains, we don't think about that little line of shadow, but it's totally there. Pendrick says, hanging out in the SCA is a great way to learn the names of medieval clothing options. I am terrible at learning the name of anything, so I'm pretty sure that even if I did hang out in the SCA, which would be cool, it is very cool, all the people recreating the traditional methods of doing things and making things. Zachariah says, I've always explained it as comic book lining is ubiquitous these days, and it's a great way to delineate between areas on a figure. I agree, but a lot of the times the people who are resistant to lining are resistant because they want to make a figure that's realistic. That's the kind of style that they prefer. So they think when people talk about contrast and lining that it's very cartoony and extreme. And certainly you can do both of those things in a way that are cartoony and extreme, but there are also both things that reflect how light behaves in real life. So things don't end up looking realistic unless you do it. But if you don't have a lot of experience in visual arts, or you haven't really tried to learn to draw, or you haven't studied this stuff very long, and you don't look at reference, it's not going to seem intuitive to you because your brain is saying a white shirt is white. It doesn't say a white shirt appears dark gray in the deep shadows and lighter gray in these shadows, and there should be that line, the occlusion shadow line between the shirt and where it overhangs the jeans. Like all of that stuff is there in reality, but that's not how our brains store and interpret knowledge. Like you really have to learn. That's the big part of learning how to draw and then paint, is learning to see. And most of the time when you're talking to people who are at the you should be adding lining stage of affairs, they don't have that experience to draw on. So I like I may mention that, like how you can see things really easily in a comic book, even though it's small and a lot is going on, and we're adding definition from the lining. I also like to try to point out to people that it happens in the real world because they start feeling better about it. Like I've got some, and I'm not going to remember the names of which articles are in because it's counterintuitively not one about lining specifically, but I've got some examples where I've taken pictures and photoshopped out the lining, essentially the natural shadows that exist, and it looks super weird. So it's like when you start showing people that, they're like, oh, okay, I start getting it. But you kind of have to do stuff like that because our brains are so good at just tuning out the stuff that we don't need to know about to answer everyday questions of life. Because like if you're thinking, what color is this shirt? And your goal is, hey, I like that guy's shirt, I want to go buy one like that. The answer, light blue, is going to be the correct answer. You do want to go buy a light blue shirt. But if you have to think about changing that question to, what colors would I use to paint something that looks like that guy's shirt? And then you're dealing with like different values and different colors and things lighter is doing. So it's like your left brain is used to, the tasks that we normally do in the world don't really require looking at things that closely and noticing the little shadow lines and all of that stuff, whereas trying to interpret something visually with paint requires more of that, and we aren't trained to do it very well. Zachariah, I am. For those folks, I've offered the option of not lining, but instead starting from dark to light and leaving a delineation using the shadow tone, which comes across as natural. Yes, I think that and washes help some people get there too. Zachariah used to be a no lining person, and yeah, I used to be much more tentative about contrast and lining because I was like, I don't want it to be too in your face and all that kind of stuff. I think the other part of it is if your application skills are at the earlier stages, yeah, it's hard to get a fine line. It is going to look like a dark and cartoony. Or if you take it too literally and you really do black on everything, yeah, that's going to look cartoony. If you try doing layering and I mean, it's tough to do. Layering, wet blending, you're going to get those transition lines. That might look worse to you than just doing dry brushing. Or when you start doing the layering, you're like, well, if I don't, if you don't use a lot of contrast, it's easier to make it look smoother. If you want to have an area that looks smooth and goes from like a really dark shadow to a really light highlight, that is technically a very challenging thing to do. So I think sometimes when people say they don't like high contrast, no, you don't like bad blending. Which is fair. I don't like bad blending either. But sometimes we kind of got to push past we got to live with the world of bad blending to get to the high contrast. And then, you got to piggyback or leapfrog. You got to leapfrog some of your skills. You got to accept that pushing this thing means maybe this other thing isn't going to look as good for a while. And then you push that thing and that looks better. And then you kind of just keep on climbing those stairs. Zachariah, and if anyone else is listening that still is not a believer of lining, Zachariah is so correct. Lining of some sort is so important to help the eye see things clearly at smaller scales. Completely vital. If you want to paint something flat colors, just add lining and already it's going to look better than the just flat colors. So you just paint out of the bottle, but add lining, or do it the other way because it can be hard to come back in late. It is very stressful to come back in later and paint super fine lines on stuff. So to start with a darker color, or what I even used to do. So in this scenario, I would paint the yellow because it's underneath the mantle. Well, actually, I guess it's the other way around. I would paint the gray, and I'd do the base coat on the gray. I'd add my dark line, then I'd clean it up. Then I do my shadows and highlights and stuff on the gray. There might be a couple of places where I went over that lining and I might have to fix it. But chances are it wouldn't be a lot of places. So it would be stressful. Then I'd come with my yellow on top. So, because I wasn't actually a clean enough painter to like paint everything dark and then paint up and leave the line. I did not have the brush control for many years to do that. So I didn't have the brush control to do that. I didn't have the brush control to paint the lines in later. But what will work for me is do base coat on the lower, whatever the underneath item was of the 2 or 3 things that were in that section, paint the line around, clean it up, then do my shading and highlighting. But the lesson we can draw from this is if you look at that the reverse way, do you want to improve your brush control? Practice lining. Grab some of your old figures that you don't care about anymore, or just one-hit monsters that you throw down on the table. Start lining those suckers. That's a great way to build brush control. Or do what Zachariah said, and you start with the darker color, and you work up, and your goal is leaving that darkest color and to turn into a definition line between that area and the next area. That's another way to improve your brush control, which really, my avoiding those tasks made it take longer for me to get the brush control to do other things that I wanted to do than if I had done those tasks in the first place. It looks like we're about at the end. Was there one more? Yes, this is actually the guy that you do the steps on in the kit. So the one where I'm like, so you put this color down and then you do this, then you do this. And I'm pretty happy with him actually. Certainly he's an example in this picture of why you should take mold lines off if you're doing like contest entries. But he was fun because he gave the opportunity to add a little color variation in ways that weren't scary or weird and introduce that guy really early. Like if Ron let me, I would probably switch the Learn to Paint kit, the first guy that you do, to this guy. Because I think it shows all those foundational things and then even a little extra. I'll have to talk to him about that maybe. He is one of 5 Boulderkin. I think their name is Boulderkin. Was it 5 or 6? There was a set of these that they came as a little add-on or something that was added to the core. I don't remember now. And they were Boulderkin. And then when Ron asked me about the kit, he proposed 12 figures, and there was one that was like had a lot of detail, and I'm like, I don't think this is a nice one to put in something that we're calling Learn to Paint. I think that's a lot. And then I'm like, would you let me have one of these guys to do the demo thing on, because he's nice and simple and there's not a lot of color areas on him, so it would keep that part of the explanation a little peppier. Quindy says there were 6 Boulderkin. I'm getting the impression that they are not released separately yet, since Zachariah said he can't wait for them to be available, and Pendrake has not seen them before. So I'm guessing they're not out yet, and only those who have a big box O Bones 5 things. This one specifically looks like 1054 from the Bones 5 core set. So that's not a SKU number. That is people, that there's little numbers next to all of the things that were in the Bones Kickstarter, so that if you are someone who is so inclined, you can verify that you received everything, or so that you can talk about a figure, because he has 5 friends. So how do we know which guy I'm talking about if you have all of them? And Quindy is confirming that they have not yet been released to retail. Well, I hope that they are soon, because it was fun to paint too. And then, like, you can imagine having all 6 of them, and then that's like a little encounter, and that's super cool too. I practiced painting him on the demon dog. There are dogs that look like they're made of stone, and I guess you're probably supposed to paint them like they're, the core is lava or something. But it was a good one for painting. But I can't, because I've thought about showing him or getting one of those guys and doing this on the stream, but those are very anatomically not Twitch dogs. So maybe I could give him a little spay neuter moment and then put him on Twitch. But I actually looked at that earlier today. I was like, oh, maybe I can paint that dog. And I'm like, oh, right, yeah, no, that's why I don't show those dogs on stream, because they got a lot of that going on. But I think we've reached the end. I will possibly see either next week. I'll grab a set of figures that are kind of more intermediate level, or I'll see if I can figure out how to get things on camera looking good enough that like a critique would be pertinent, or I'll do color mixing. So chances are, unless the doctor's like, here's a miracle cure for your neck, chances are that's what I'll be doing next week, which I'm sorry it's not painting. I haven't been able to paint miniatures. I haven't been able to do my oil painting. I can't write for longer than 15 minutes. I can't do almost everything I think is fun. Other than I can play a lot of Diablo 4. So there's that. Prince Paradox says John is treasure, and that is a very accurate statement. I'm not sure what John did specifically for Prince Paradox to sing his praises, but I'm sure it was something wonderfully helpful. And now Quindy's going to be wonderfully helpful and find us a raid. Maybe she'll find someone who is actively painting. Quindy wants to know if this is John's account. And I'll see you next week. I apologize for the not painting or sculpting or whatever. I'll try to get back there, because it'd be fun for me too. So let's see what Quindy finds for us. She's usually pretty good at finding fun stuff to do. I'll see you soon too, Zachariah. Thanks for all your feedback, because you had some very helpful things in chat, like words that I don't know. We're going to see Lizard the Tree Wizard. So say hi, spread the Reaper love, and I'll see you next week. Maybe not the week after, but we'll see. We'll see how energetic I am. See you guys later. Have fun. Oh, wait. No, I'm waiting until... Hold on. We actually go to the raid.